So the idea of listing your home has popped in your head, but you don't really know all the things to consider. Well, this video is for you. Hey everyone, Mariah Taliaferro with Premier Sotheby's. Thanks so much for tuning into this channel. And of course, if you haven't already subscribed, be sure to do that and like this video so the content is shared with other people who might find it interesting. So you're thinking about listing your home and you want to know all the things to think about. Well, we've put together a concise list that you'll find in this video. So starting out, you really want to get educated on the market, especially the market in your community. So things like, is it a buyer's market or a seller's market? And what that really means is if it's a seller's market, that means you are in, as a seller, the driver's seat, and things are kind of leaning more towards your favor. Versus it being a buyer's market, that means the buyer has the favor essentially and the power in the negotiation. 6 months of inventory, because we base a seller's market and its buyer's market based on the months of inventory. So if there's 6 months of inventory, that means that there's a balanced market. We can get into how you calculate months of inventory. I'd recommend just doing a Google search or speaking to a realtor about what their opinion is about the market. You also want to think about the number of days on the market. So if a home is taking 6 months to sell, that's really going to set your expectations and your timeline versus if it's going to sell in 2 weeks. So that's a big thing to consider so you can set up your timeline. You also want to look at the list price to the sales price ratio. So what that means is if you list a price for $1 million, but it sells for $950,000, that's 95% of list price. So what does all this data mean? Well, it just gives you an indication on the health of the market and also helps you set your expectations. So if you list your property for a certain figure and you know that it's a 95% to list price ratio, then you kind of have an idea of where you're going to land. Now that's assuming you price it right the first time. So we can get into all of that as well. But ultimately these initial things to think about, you can literally call up your real estate agent. Of course, if you don't have one, we have recommendations based on your area, and really find out what is the health of the market in your community. So that's the first thing to consider. Now you want to think about the costs of the sale. So there are realtor commissions in general. Those are about 5 to 6% depending on your market. You are also going to have sales tax, and based on the community that you live, I should really say the county, sometimes the seller is responsible for paying those versus the buyer, and depending on the type of market you're in, meaning if it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, you may be able to negotiate that. So if you are a seller, you're more likely to be able to negotiate with a buyer for them to pay your sales tax. Also, there's title insurance, and title insurance essentially is there's insurance on the title, hence the name. So making sure that there's clear title when it's transferring over to the buyer. In our county, which is Sarasota County, that's something that the buyer pays for, but in the county next door in Manatee, that's something that the seller pays for. So depending on your county, there's that fee as well. So you really want to know what are the fees associated with the actual sale. The third thing to consider, which you probably already thought about this, is where are you going to go next? And that's a big question. Are you going to rent? Are you going to have another home that you can live in? Are you going to purchase another home? So really come up with a game plan of what your next step is. And again, going back to the market conditions, that'll help you set up a plan because you know, oh, I have 6 months to figure it out, or I really only have a week. You really want to focus on your Batna, and Batna means best alternative to the negotiation agreement, and pretty much what that means is your alternative. So let's say you're in a negotiation with a buyer and you don't have a backup plan. Well, you're in a very weak position when it comes to the negotiation. So you really want to understand what your alternative is. If you know, hey, if I don't get $950 for my home, I am not going to sell because I don't need to. Or, hey, I have to sell because I've already put another property under contract. That's a different BATNA. So you really want to analyze that and strengthen your BATNA by coming up with alternative plans if plan A does not work out. Working with the right real estate agent will help you strengthen and come up with various BATNAs. The fifth thing I'm going to bring up to consider, and this will be the last, are the tax consequences. So you really need to think about capital gains tax. So if you buy a home and there's a dramatic rise in value and that really incentivizes you to sell it later, you would be required to pay capital gains tax. If you've owned your home for at least 2 years and meet the primary residence rules, you may owe tax on the profit if it exceeds the IRS thresholds. So a single person can exclude up to $250,000 of gain, and married persons filing jointly can exclude up to $500,000 of gain. But pretty much short-term capital gains, they're taxed as ordinary income, so with rates as high as 37% if you're a high-income earner. Long-term capital gains tax rates are 0% up to 20%, with rates applied to income and tax filing status. So there you have it, the 5 things to think about when you're thinking about listing your home. I hope this video is helpful, and of course, share it with your friends, like the video, put your comments below if you have questions, or just reach out to me directly anytime. Thanks so much for tuning in.